Welcome back. We're talking about the global obesity epidemic. What's causing expanding waistlines worldwide? Still with me, Eric Ding, a nutritionist and health scientist at Harvard University and CEO of Happy Vitals from Mexico City. Laura Carlsen is director of the Mexico City-based Americas program for the Center for International Policy. And from Las Vegas, Andy Bellatti is a nutritionist and strategic director of Dietitians for Professional Integrity. Eric, we're talking about countries like China, where obesity rates are rising, Mexico, the United States. While researching this subject, we also found that there are very high rates in a place I wouldn't have expected, and that is the Persian Gulf, the countries of the Persian Gulf. What explains that?
Absolutely. Well, the Persian Gulf, I actually have projects in the Middle East. They have very, very sedentary lifestyles, partly because of some of their culture, that outdoor physical activity is frowned upon, but also because of the climate, because it's very difficult to exercise in 120 degree Fahrenheit, 40 degrees Celsius weather. And to compound it together there, you have naturally a growing obesity fueled by the very, very high wealth and rise of affluence in the Middle East that contributes to, again, the proliferation of the sedentary lifestyle compounded by the high dietary caloric westernization of food.
Laura, talk to us a bit about some of the education efforts, if any, in a place like Mexico to combat rising rates of obesity.
Well, in the public schools and in other forums, they're encouraging children first to get more exercise, because it's true that a big part of it is also this change in lifestyle where you have children staying in more, watching video games and activities that are largely sedentary compared to a different set of activities in the relatively near past. They're also educating parents, because parents in the culture, they used to think if their child was gordito, a little bit fat, it meant that they were well off, it meant that they were healthy and well fed, because undernutrition, malnutrition, has been a specter, especially in the countryside, for so many years in Mexico. Of course, it used to be the major nutrition challenge within the country, and now they're kind of neck and neck because they're still undernutrition as well. So they're going to the parents and saying, no, this is not a positive thing. This is extremely dangerous for your child. It'll set a pattern for the rest of his or her life. There are children who are having problems with breathing, who have social problems related to this. And they're beginning to talk to both the children and the parents. But unfortunately, those health efforts are reaching only a very small portion of the population who needs to get this information. So there's still a lot more to be done.
Right, interesting you mentioned that, because experts call this family and cultural values, and it's kind of encapsulated by this phrase, in a place like Mexico, food is love. So some of the priorities may be wrong there, right?
Yeah, that definitely happens, and so they have to show them that, yes, food is love, but as with anything else, it has to be with moderation, and you have to know what you're doing, because the nutrition level and the type of nutrition in raising your children is absolutely essential, and people are beginning to understand that more and more, but not everywhere that needs to be said.
And if I may add, I think the culture and of food is love and family is really important, because we've demonstrated and shown that obesity spreads in social networks, that it's correlated with a friend and a friend's friend and a friend's friend's friend. And really that project that I'm involved with, a nonprofit, Microclinic International, they've actually shown that by intervening with social network interventions, we can actually propagate obesity prevention with improving the nutrition, diet, and lifestyle for a whole community. So really leveraging that obesity is a family social network phenomenon. I think that's actually how we can potentially tackle it. Not just that food is love, but that because of family and love, we can actually tackle the obesity.
Right, Andy, looking at efforts to tackle this problem, the World Health Organization, a UN agency, considers obesity preventable. They say that we can prevent this. Two questions. One is, if it's preventable, how did it grow so fast? And the other question is what we call globalization responsible for this as well?
Yeah, and what I was just going to bring up is that if you're looking at things like food being love or a lack of sedentary activity that might be cultural in the Middle East, this has been around for decades, but obesity is fairly recent. So what we have to look at is, okay, what else has happened on top of all that? And you look at, again, globalization, you look at the Western diet, you also look at big food and big soda going after what they call emerging markets. The truth is that in the US, for example, the soda industry is realizing that its days are numbered. So now it's looking somewhere else. And one of the countries where it's looking, for example, is Nigeria, where there's so much room for growth. And you see it doing the typical tactics that it does here. It sponsors youth soccer championships. It markets relentlessly. It sends out this message that they care about health. It's the typical tactics that industry employs to ingratiate itself in the community and then sell its products. So obesity, is it preventable? Yes, but you have to understand that our choices are only as healthy as our environments. And if we want people to nudge them toward healthier choices, we have to look at environments. If you look at smoking, for example, in the US, what was the number one thing that helped to lower smoking levels? It wasn't just education. People knew and still know that smoking is not healthy. You needed policy to drive that message home and to make the act of smoking more difficult and not as accessible to everybody.
Right, that's a great analogy actually, because we saw that happen here in the United States, where the tobacco industry came under heavy pressure. There was a change in policy on the part of the government, and what did? They moved to other countries around the world, mainly developing countries. Laura, have you found a similar experience in Mexico, where because of the pressure being put on companies here in the United States, the problem has effectively been exported?
Yes, I think so. And that the important thing to take into account there, related to the last point, is that there's a choice involved. People choose what they eat. But in many of these environments, what's accessible is really, really important. So as the companies begin to see these developing countries as their emerging markets, and as basically their growth area, and at the same time, they're seeing some reduction in the developed countries as people become more aware of the health risks involved, then they're creating these environments where people in a small, remote Indian village, for example, they have a very difficult time getting fresh drinking water, and Coca-Cola is cheap and available. Those trucks go all over the country to the smallest little corner stores, whether it's a city or a village. And they begin to develop the habit of drinking soft drinks. And the same with fast foods and with junk food, because there's been a reduction in the consumption of fresh fruits and vegetables. And part of that is because they're much less accessible than they used to be. And you can buy for $1 or less, you know, a bag of potato chips at the corner store almost anywhere within the country. So creating these environments that push people toward an unhealthy diet and actually deny them access to healthy foods is a really important part of this.
And that's one thing that has happened here in the U.S., where when you look at the relative cost of fruits and vegetables over the past 30 years and look at the relative cost of soda and fast food, vegetables have become, relatively speaking, more expensive, while highly processed, minimally nutritious foods have, over the past 30 years, actually become more affordable. So that's one problem, largely due to agricultural subsidies.
Eric, are we going to see serious consequences for, broadly speaking, society if we don't get a handle on obesity?
I think we will, and we're right now just at the tip of the iceberg, because the growing problem is childhood obesity. And so we have to think about our future generations. And the obesity in adults is nothing compared to the future generations of a huge amounts of childhood obesity that's growing and booming. And literally it's a ticking time bomb. I think this is the first time that our children will have a shorter life expectancy than our adults unless we counteract and correct for this.
Because it seems a little bit counterintuitive, because we see high obesity rates in the United States, yet here lifespan is increasing, isn't it? Is that because of medical science? Or?
A lot of it is medical science, but the medical science will only go so far.
Yeah.
In terms of heart disease and diabetes prevention, we're already at the tip of many of what we know about prevention. We know 90% of diabetes is preventable.
Right.
So all of this is preventable, and it's really down to focusing on future generations that we have to clamp down for greater population